Kevin, you know, on this show, we love to highlight positive uses of this technology and ways that people are using AI and other tools to make the world a better place.
We sure do.
And this segment is not about that. Because something else that people do, Kevin, is use new technologies to commit crimes.
Oh, so you told me we were going to do a crime segment, and I was very excited because I thought finally we're going to solve a murder on this podcast like the serial people.
We are not going to solve a murder, but we are going to kill it. Speaking of the serial people, they didn't hit 100 episodes. But anyways, today, Kevin, we're going down to the courthouse, and we're looking for justice. Introducing Hard Fork Crime Division.
Do we have a theme song?
We do. Wow. I already I feel like I'm like down at a bodega interviewing the proprietor about whether he like saw someone last week. Speaking of which,
are you the grizzled veteran of the police force or the plucky newcomer?
I'm absolutely the grizzled veteran. Are you more plucky newcomer?
I'm more of a plucky newcomer vibe.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, listen, today we're cracking open our case files on 3 recent operations because, Kevin, whether we like it or not, new technology is rewriting the rules of crime and justice.
All right, let's get into it.
All right. Case 1, the Russian ruse.
And that's different than the Russian Roose, who's my cousin Boris, who's a disaster, and we never talk about him.
That's right. This was a different kind of ruse altogether. So you may have seen this. Last week, the Justice Department accused 2 Russians of orchestrating a foreign influence campaign. Just as in 2016 and 2020, Kevin, the Russians are attempting to influence our election. But this time around, they're using real people, social media influencers who already had large audiences in an effort to reach their goals. So I'm sure by now you have seen this story.
I'm obsessed with this story.
Yeah. Well, what has obsessed you about it?
So, you know, there are these people on YouTube who have huge audiences and, you know, command lots of trust from their fans. Many of them are conservative and sort of on the right wing. And this time around, when the Russians thought about how do we want to influence American politics, they didn't like think about how do we start a troll farm that's going to, you know, fill Facebook with fake messages. They said, how could we pay these people who are already doing basically our work in the U.S. In a way that would be hard to trace, and we could basically have our own slate of influencers? And they actually did it.
They did it. So let's talk about how this worked. So according to the indictment, the Russians funneled about $10 million into a Tennessee-based online content creation company called Tenet Media. You ever get your news from Tenet Media?
I've seen their videos before, for sure. It's like, it's run by Lauren Chen, who's this sort of longtime conservative influencer, and her husband. And they had a bunch of deals with a bunch of YouTubers to distribute their content.
Yes, and those conservative stars included Benny Johnson, who has 2.4 million subscribers on YouTube, Tim Pool, who has 1.3 million, and Dave Rubin, who has 2.4 million subscribers on YouTube. And some of those stars made content with really prominent conservatives, including Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a former presidential candidate, and Laura Trump, who is the Republican National Committee chairwoman. So this was part of an operation that was really reaching a lot of conservative people. And so, of course, everyone is asking, did the influencers know? And apparently they did not. But of course, some people have pointed to some issues that might have made them aware.
Yeah, so let's just run through a little bit of what happened here according to the Department of Justice, because I think that if you look at the evidence that we have in this case so far, it is extremely unlikely that these conservative YouTube influencers did not at least have an inkling that someone from Russia or another foreign country was paying their bills, was paying them to make content.
Okay, make your case.
So all of the influencers who have responded so far to this story have basically said, we had no idea. We are victims of this scheme. We didn't know that Russia was paying our bills. And then you start looking at the details. So one of the details is just about the amounts of money that are being paid to these influencers. Now, we don't know exactly, which influencers took exactly how much money from this company, Tenet Media, but we do know from people who have sort of pieced together the sort of unnamed influencers in this indictment with some of the things that have been said on these YouTube channels, we know that someone we believe is Tim Pool, the conservative YouTuber, was reportedly paid $100,000 per video.
And amazingly, these were not like bespoke videos for Tenet Media. These were just the videos that he was already making that someone shows up out of nowhere and says, we're going to pay you $100,000 to essentially license this.
Yes. Another YouTuber, Dave Rubin, another right-wing media figure, was reportedly paid $400,000 a month plus a $100,000 signing bonus. And when they asked who was paying them, because some of these influencers, it appears, did actually sort of take note, their ears perked up when these people start showing up out of nowhere with bags of money for them for apparently not a lot of extra work. Representatives of the company replied by making up a wealthy benefactor named Edward Gregorian, who appears not to have existed, and they sent over like an info sheet about this made-up, money man, and it was just a picture of like a man in a private jet with some sort of made-up biographical details. Now, I don't know about you, Casey, but if someone showed up at the Hard Fork offices tomorrow and said, we want to pay you $400,000 a month
that'd be great.
for you to put your podcast on our channel, and by the way, if you ask any questions about who's funding this all, we're going to direct you to a fake-looking shot of someone on a private jet. I for one would have some questions about that.
Yeah, and you would dig really deep to make sure the money wasn't coming from the government of Russia?
Yes, especially if some of the ideas that they had for my content were that I should start saying nice things about Russia and mean things about Ukraine, as evidently happened with some of these YouTubers.
Yeah, well, so tell us about the pro-Kremlin messages that the Russians wanted to push here.
So again, the influencers who are involved in this case have been pretty consistent, saying they don't believe they were sort of taking marching orders from the Russians. Essentially, these are just our personal views. We had total editorial control over these videos. But there are still a few examples that the DOJ pointed to in this indictment about how Russians tried to influence the content that these right-wing influencers made for Tenet Media. At one point, the Russians asked Tenet's founders to basically seed the idea among the influencers that in their network that they should start criticizing Ukraine, like spreading an idea that Ukraine was behind a deadly attack at a concert hall in Moscow in March rather than ISIS. The Russians apparently also pushed Tenet to highlight a video from Tucker Carlson where he was walking around a supermarket in Russia, just sort of marveling at how much stuff there was on the shelves. And this is my favorite detail. A producer for Tenet apparently said that the video just felt like overt shilling. Basically, this was too obviously Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
This would give up the game if they put this on their channel, but after being pressured by Tenet's founders, they agreed to post the clip anyway.
Yeah. Kevin, do we have any reason to believe that anything the Russians were doing here was effective?
I mean, I think if you're measuring their effectiveness related to previous campaigns, I would say this was actually much more bang for their buck than what they did in 2016, which, you could debate how much of an influence all of their troll farms and their operations had on that election. But they were not being sort of parroted. Their messages were not being parroted by some of the biggest, figures in conservative media, which is what happened this time. Now, again, you could say those people are just victims. They had no idea that the money was coming from Russia. It just happened that their views aligned on many subjects with those of the Kremlin. But I think if you're being realistic, you have to say, well, how much other Russian money is propping up some of these conservative media figures? Where else might we be seeing sort of these shell companies and shell operations sort of funneling money to influential people along the partisan spectrum? And how many people are actually sort of may not know where their money is coming from? Maybe that's coming from the Kremlin. What do you think?
I mean, it's an important question because in the United States, our country is incredibly polarized. And one thing we've learned about the Russians is that they love to sow division. They love to make Americans mad at each other. And so when you have a group of conservative influencers who love trying to burn down the status quo and do nothing but, speak in really apocalyptic terms about the state of American society, if you're the Kremlin, it's like, yeah, kick them a few $100,000 a month. Make them say that louder. Make them say it in more places. How far can we spread that video? So in a very real way, these YouTube influencers were doing the work of the Kremlin for them. And I think that's just kind of a good thing to keep in mind as you are encountering media over the next several weeks leading up to the election. Always worth asking yourself, who benefits from you believing that what you're hearing is true?
Yeah. How much money would it take for you to do Kremlin propaganda?
I'm not doing Kremlin propaganda.
Everyone's got a price.
No, absolutely not. Like the Russian regime hates gay people, among many other human rights violations. So it's going to be a no from me, dog.
Yeah, well, I think they've been actually modifying their views on gay people. And I learned that on a recent trip to a Moscow supermarket that I want to tell you about.
No, Kevin, no! All right, case closed. We're moving on to the next crime, Kevin.
What's the next crime?
A disturbing story about the 3D printed gun promoter. This is a tale about a 26-year-old named John Ellick who goes by the online name Ivan the Troll. You have to wonder if he ever considered Ivan the Terrible. I mean, it was sitting just right there. But he helped design and spread instructions online for how to build a popular 3D printed gun. This gun is called the FGC-9. You know what that stands for?
No.
It stands for, and this is not a joke, fuck gun control. And the 9 refers to the 9mm bullets that it fires.
Very subtle.
And it's being promoted with the explicit goal of arming as many people as possible.
This is actually a very worrying story to me because this is something that people who are worried about, guns and the proliferation of guns in this country have been blowing the whistle on for a long time. But it actually seems to be a problem. And there was a very good story by Lizzie Dearden and Thomas Gibbons-Neff in the Times the other day about this gun, the FGC-9, that has been sort of identified all over the world. It's been appeared in the hands of paramilitaries in Northern Ireland, rebels in Myanmar, and neo-Nazis in Spain. It is basically the gun of choice for a lot of terrorists around the world. And unlike other guns, you can 3D print the FGC-9 at home using a 3D printer. So it is very hard to control the spread of this gun.
Yeah, and, in the Times story, there is a video of what the FGC looks like, and it looks like a Nerf gun. It really looks like a child's toy. But as you say, Kevin, if you have access to a 3D printer, you can just make this at your house. So what is the crime? Well, the craziest part of this story is that some of this might not be illegal. In the United States, there are many different state laws that regulate 3D printed guns. But in Illinois, where Ivan the Troll lives, you are allowed to sell and possess homemade gun components if you are a firearm manufacturer. And this guy is. So what do we make of the spread of 3D guns here, Kevin?
I mean, it is just so nuts to me that this is legal. I mean, if you can 3D print a gun in your house using a commercial 3D printer that you can go on the internet and buy and a plan that you can download for free from the internet, I actually do think that should be illegal. And the Biden administration has actually proposed trying to regulate homemade gun components as firearms. And I hope that this becomes illegal. There's something so sinister and dark about a world in which anyone using a sort of off-the-shelf 3D printer can be making their own lethal weapons.
Yeah, sometimes I feel such a cognitive disconnect as we've spent so much time in recent months talking about are social media algorithms harmful? And then meanwhile, anyone can just print a gun at their house and just, walk up and shoot up a supermarket or something. So yeah, a very disturbing story, but I'm glad that more attention is coming to just how widespread these guns now are.
Yeah. It's also it's just such a good lesson in kind of the sort of unintended consequences of new technology. I mean, I remember a decade or so ago when 3D printers were first becoming popular and accessible, and you could get one. And there were all these sort of, predictions that we'd all be, 3D printing, parts for our household appliances or toys for our kids, or there were even startups trying to use 3D printers to make houses. And as it turns out, guns turned out to be the sort of use case that actually did find product market fit from the looks of things. And I just think it's such a dark example of how some a technology that is built to make things easier and better in the world can instead make things more deadly.
All right.
I have one more thing to say about this, which is that this is actually an area where I do think that content moderation could save lives. Right? I think if you make a 3D printer and that printer has the ability to make a gun, I think you actually should put something in your system that says, hey, it looks like you're trying to make a gun here at home. We actually don't allow that. So I don't know why the 3D printer manufacturers have not blocked this use of their devices, but I think that is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, and it suggests that unfortunately this might be like a major reason that people are buying 3D printers, right? Like I think that if 3D printing manufacturers felt like they could just easily block this without any blowback, maybe they already would have done it, because otherwise what business would want to be known as the printer that made the gun that was, responsible for some horrible tragedy?
Yeah.
Well, we said the last case was closed, but this one, unfortunately, I have to say, is still open.
Yeah.
All right, let's do one more, Kevin, and talk about our final case today, the Spotify swindler. According to authorities, a 52-year-old man in North Carolina manipulated music streaming sites and made $10 million in royalties from companies including Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music, and he has the name Michael Smith, which I'm going to say, if I ever decided to commit a crime, I wish I had a name like Michael Smith, because you'd never be able to find me in Google.
It's true.
But this Michael Smith, according to the authorities, created this scheme that unfolded over 7 years, and it really is a wild one. He partnered with the chief executive of an AI music company and a music promoter to create hundreds of thousands of AI-generated songs, which he then uploaded to the music streaming sites, because of course that's how these sites work. Anybody can go in and create an account, upload their songs. Then he made a bunch of fake streaming accounts using email addresses that he bought online. The authorities say up to 10,000 accounts. And then he used software to stream those songs, Kevin, on a loop, playing them hundreds of thousands of times a day. And he used VPNs to make it look like the songs were all streaming from different locations. And according to the indictment, over this period of years, the songs were streamed billions of times. Kevin, what do you make of this idea for a crime?
So I love this story because it's not only like a good caper involving AI and tech platforms and all the stuff we talk about, but it is also just like a kind of genius arbitrage and exploitation of the music streaming algorithms. And maybe we should just explain like how this kind of works, because I think it's not obvious to people why a scheme like this would work.
Yeah, and so Matt Levine wrote a great column about this at Bloomberg. But basically, you pay Spotify, let's say, around $12 a month, and then Spotify takes all of the people who pay them $12 a month. That gives them a certain amount of revenue, and then they pay out about 3/4 of that to the people who have uploaded their songs to Spotify. So all the major record labels, and then people like this Michael Smith that just sort of showed up and did it themselves. And so Michael Smith's calculation was, well, I'm going to pay to get a Spotify account, but then if I stream my music enough, I will be able to recoup that and then make a profit from all of my streams. So that was the scheme.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of an amazingly ingenious way to kind of work the system of Spotify and these other platforms that do pay out these kind of fractional royalties. And it actually seems to have been quite effective. Like he made something on the order of like more than $10 million from streaming these sort of AI-generated songs. But isn't this like against the terms of service of the platforms? Like, how did they not catch this?
To say the least, right? Like, this was not the first person to realize that this arbitrage opportunity existed, but he does seem to have exploited it on an unprecedented scale. Now, Kevin, let me ask you, did you ever run across a Michael Smith song on Spotify?
Well, there's Michael W. Smith, who I believe is like a Christian musical artist.
That's correct.
Who I think I have listened to before.
Okay. Well, this is not that Michael Smith. This one came up with some pretty amazing band names that appear to just be essentially random pairings of words. So some of his bands included Calm Baseball, Calm Knuckles, Calvin Man, Calvinistic Dust, Kamalis Dyson, and then a bunch of other things that are, barely pronounceable. And he did the same thing with names of the song. So the indictment highlights a lot of songs starting with the letter Z. So there was like Zymoplastic, Zymopure, Zymotechnical, Zymotechny. A bunch of nonsense, in other words, and stuff that, frankly, I think would have been really hard to find if you were searching for that. And I wonder if that was sort of part of the idea here, was make these things obscure on purpose.
Right, because these songs were never meant to be listened to by actual people. They were just songs that Michael Smith's alleged bot accounts could just kind of like go out and stream over and over and over again, racking up the streaming royalties.
Right. Now, as we've just described, this Michael Smith went through a very elaborate scheme in order to make his $10 million. I have to wonder, if he had just put that same amount of effort into writing a good song, is it possible that he could have made another $10 million and kept himself out of prison?
We'll never know.
We really won't.
This to me does feel like a crime of the future, right? Because you have this kind of platform that has sort of minimal oversight and moderation on it. You have this sort of royalty scheme that allows people to be paid based on the popularity of what they're making and putting on the platform. And I think, this is the situation that we're in right now with a lot of social platforms. And I do think that there will be creators, fraudsters, spammers who just try to sort of find those arbitrage opportunities, those times where you can, pay $12 a month for an account and use that account to make $20 back for yourself. And that's just going to be an increasingly big part of how these platforms get gamed.
Yeah. And now, if you're wondering why this is a crime, the reason is because all of the royalties that Michael Smith was making, those should have been going to artists that had just made real music and were not, setting up crazy schemes to stream their own songs hundreds of thousands of times a day. So that was the illegal part.
Yeah, it's interesting because the crime here was not that Michael Smith, allegedly violated the law by making all this fake music. Like it's not illegal to make AI generated music and put it on Spotify. The crime in the Department of Justice's eyes was that by sort of tainting the royalty pool this way that was shared with all these other artists, these real artists making real music, that he was essentially stealing from those other artists, which I just think is like an interesting legal wrinkle here.
All right. Well, case closed on you, Michael Smith, and case closed on this chapter of Hard Fork Crimes Division.
I'm glad we solved some crimes today.
Did we solve them?
We still have to.
We certainly described them.
Yeah. Yes, and now we can actually classify this podcast as a true crime podcast and get the millions of downloads that will result.
Love that. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.